Bien le bonjour, welcome to the third part of this never-ending series of explanations that will only make you sleep into a coma. Allons-y! Revolution! The summons were definitely at the center of the game, because all actions, outside of the basic attack, weren't available without a rather complex junctioning system. The summons were called Guardian Forces, or simply G-Forces, and you had to junction them first to the characters, then you could junction more active abilities and passive effects. The equipment being limited to only the weapon, the stat upgrades revolved around spell junctions to these same stats. However, each spell wouldn't improve different stats to the same magnitude. No MP either, spells worked like items that you stacked up to 100. 100 was also the level limit in this title, an original feature. The enemy's level was often equal to the average level of your team. Lastly, the G-Forces had for the first time their own level and HP. Summoning one will cover your own HP as well as a reversed ATB gauge that summoned the creature once it was fully depleted. It could also act as a secondary life bar, preventing death in some situations. The speed at which it depleted depended on the affinity between the character and the G-Force. Also, for whatever reason, this game didn't have rows like the previous ones. Back to FF4's values, with each protagonist having up to 3 reoccurring jobs associated. The big difference being the way of getting new abilities and spells could only be done through equipments. A much more improved and expanded feature than the FF6 Magicites, this time you could actually use the abilities as long as you weren't the gears, until you got enough ability points. However, not all of them could be learned by everyone, and there was a limit to how many passive abilities you could activate at the same time. Each one of them used up a number of magic stones, and your total could be increased by leveling up a character. This was also the only PlayStation-era title with 4 characters in battle. This episode was unique for a lot of reasons, rarely or never reappearing in the next games. Starting with its fighting system called Conditional Turn-Based Battle, or CTB. Abandoning the quickly paced ATB, you could take your time to choose your actions and see their effect on a scrolling window at the upper right of the fighting interface. Ironically, it was truly the speed stat that was the focal point. A nimble character would resume attacks sooner, and the second important part was the action itself. Casting a high potency spell forced you to delay your next turn a lot more than using an item. Still about the battle, this was the first game allowing you to switch characters how you wanted without any penalty. Really useful at the beginning because of the sphere grids sections, it became less important as you progressed further in the game. Sadly, only the character currently under your control could swap their place, which meant that if the 3 active ones were knocked down, even if the others in stock were alive and well, it was game over. Now you're probably wondering, what is a sphere grid? Simply the progression system of your characters that was a lot more accessible and customizable than in FF2. The EXP points had their name replaced by the ability points that would allow you to move your character on the sphere grid once you reached a sphere level, eventually using a suitable sphere to activate a node for that character. Depending on the release, there weren't the same sphere grids. I'll just focus on the standard one from the PAL and HD remaster versions. Your characters each started in a set part of the grid that would define them for a big part of the story, echoing jobs from previous FF games because of locks, base stats and/or starting skills, but also the spheres you could activate along your way. Past some points in the game, protagonists could explore more parts of the grid until full completion, so they could all get every spells, skills, etc. Also, thanks to some specific spheres and blank nodes, you could improve your character's stats to reach the max, but not in all of them at the same time, unfortunately. Additionally, it was the first episode to allow you to break the 4 digits HP and 3 digits MP limits, and go up to 5-9 HP and 4-9 MP. The third major feature, this time reused in other entries, was the opportunity to take control of the summons as if they were characters, with their own stats and skills that could be improved once you obtained some key items. The last feature was about the equipment. Only 1 weapon and 1 protection, they actually didn't have any stats. However, all of them had ability slots, free or not, and up to 4 slots. You could add abilities in the free slots at some point in the story by using the right items, though it was only passive effects like plus 10% HP or silence proof. This episode was officially the first direct sequel to a Final Fantasy game. Also, the story progressed through side quests and chapters. You could only play 3 characters in the original release, but the jobs were back and regrouped weapons, protections and skills under the name of Dress Spheres, which also reduced the number of customizable equipment to only 2 accessories. Outside of 4 Dress Spheres, all of the heroines had the same stats and access to the same skills. A second version called International Plus Last Mission was released in Japan only until the Remaster HD release. In addition to 2 new Dress Spheres and some balancing left and right, it introduced a monster taming system through traps, allowing you to replace 1 to 3 of your characters with different sized monsters. S small took 1 character slot, M medium for 2 slots, and L large for the 3 slots. You only had little control over them thanks to those little stars on top of the screen. The more stars you added, the more reckless the monsters acted and sustained damages, whereas fewer stars reduced the damages and incited them to cast defensive skills. Far from being useless, taming monsters taught you more about FF10 and 10-2 lore through stories told by most of them. These small stories progressed by leveling the monster, and when you finished the main story chapter, you needed to advance 4 times before releasing it and watch a final cutscene. It rewarded you with some items and completed another bestiary where you could read and watch again those side stories once you completed them. Oh, and there was also some Coliseum, but whatever. Moreover, this was the first time you could switch classes while in fight, as long as the classes were next to each other on a garment grid set outside of battles. Tamed monsters had to equip a garment grid and a dress sphere. On top of modifying their stats, it gave them passive and active abilities, but you couldn't change them in fight, since you didn't directly control them. The garment grids could also act as a third accessory with passive effects or active skills, that will sometimes require to swap some dress spheres in battle. Additionally, the game let go of the sphere grids and the CTB system to go back to the classical leveling and the ATB, while still changing the latter a bit. Here, much like the CTB, the ATB gauges were modified according to the speed stats and the action itself. The slower classes and the strongest skills or spells needed a longer charging or cooling time. Learning new active or passive abilities was done by killing monsters. Each of the characters alive would receive points, but only for their currently active dress sphere. Of course, you had some control over the next ability you would learn in the corresponding menu by selecting where the ability points would go first. The allied monsters learned new abilities and could improve their stats permanently with the consumption of items or accessories, like the summons in FF10. Time to wake up! Hope you had a good nap, see you next week I guess. We're heading to the second half of this, just hang in there. Prenez soin de vous et amusez-vous bien.